when an unanticipated trial that causes complete disarray in the early hours of the morning of April 13th, 2025, Las Vegas was not only teeming with tourists who were rushing to the casinos or entranced by the bright strip, the atmosphere that surrounded the Clark County Courthouse had a weight that was not to be expected. Before sunrise, journalists were already lining up with their cameras, which were already illuminated. The legal case in question was not your average one. It revolved around a well-known character from the program as its focal point. Rick Harrison is the star of Pawn. The bright and self-assured demeanor that Rick had been renowned for on television was no longer present when he arrived in the courtroom because he was shackled and obviously exhausted. A man who was pallid, quiet, and with shoulders that were drooping was standing in front of the cameras. The courtroom was swamped with people who were watching. As soon as the judge read the charges, there was an immediate cessation of murmuring. Rick is accused of committing 16 federal offenses in a nearly 200-page indictment. For the purpose of obtaining one black gold, the prosecution portrayed the case as an organized operation that was camouflaged as a business and utilized the pawn shop fake firms and casino cash activities, people being trafficked. Rick was described as the mastermind and the enforcer of the plan. Everyone was shaken by the evidence, recordings of surveillance footage, his handwritten notes, encrypted emails, and statements from victims concealed behind the shop were all found. A terrible picture of a modern slavery ring that was in plain sight was constructed by each individual component. The judge delivered the ultimate blow when he or she, this was the first ruling that the judge handed out. The court has decided to sentence the accused Richard Kevin Harrison to death by lethal injection after conducting a comprehensive evaluation of the facts, witness testimony, and the severe impact on the victims. As the verdict was announced, there was complete silence in the room. Later on, a cry could be heard coming from the audience. A juror let her pen fall once it was established that she was the mother of a girl who had gone missing. Instantaneously, journalists communicated any new information to their headquarters. Rick maintained his lack of feeling. There is no appeal. It is silent. There is no overt response. He closed his eyes, giving the impression that he had long before arrived to this conclusion. In the vicinity, a crowd had gathered. There were posters that stated justice for survivors that were hung between the steps, news organizations from around the world. There were breaking news reports issued by CNN, BBC, and Reuters. A. Harrison, Rick, a man who went from being a television icon to being reviled. The hashtag, which hashed a Rick Harrison death sentence, achieved over 4 million mentions on the internet in just one day through the use of the internet. In spite of the fact that devoted fans insisted that it was a devastating mistake, advocacy groups against human trafficking referred to it as the first reckoning in a bigger battle for the truth. As a symbol of the modern American success story, the illegal network that was hidden by a television mogul named Rick Harrison was particularly significant. A man did not continue his education and, in collaboration with his father, established a humble pawn store in the city of Las Vegas. He gained to prominence as the star of the History Channel's Pawn Stars thanks to his astute thinking and charming abilities in the business world. Some of the most famous scenes, expert insights, and memorable negotiation scenes. For nearly 15 years, the moments that I will refer to as expert moments have become a permanent fixture, drawing in millions of spectators. On the other hand, a covert operation was taking place behind the scenes of the show's success. The emergence of a second enterprise functioned with mechanical precision while remaining hidden from cameras and other forms of public attention. Its primary intent was not to deal in memorabilia but rather in people trafficking. By 2009, the once average gold and silver pawn shop had transformed into a daily hotspot that generated enormous revenues. This was due to the fact that Pawn Stars had made their debut and acquired significant traction. Over the course of his speaking engagements, book sales, and merchandising deals, Rick became an icon of Las Vegas. Nevertheless, that celebrity position turned out to be the perfect disguise for illegal activities. Between the years 2016 and 2022, Rick managed or had connections to a minimum of 6 shell companies. Despite the fact that these businesses did not engage in any actual business activity, did not have any locations, did not have any employees, and did not have any offices, their accounts were constantly funded through unknown sources located overseas. Following the discovery of a suspicious shipping receipt labeled rare objects, which was later revealed by survivors to be a code for humans, the Pale Pawn operation of the Federal Bureau of Investigation (FBI) was able to unearth the plan. They investigated every possible hint, from stock exchanges to gas stations, and went through hundreds of digital records. They also tracked financial activity, employed undercover agents, and monitored financial transactions. What arose was a complex web that was centered around Rick's pawn shop, which served as the conduit, the disguise, and the primary location where dirty money was cleaned. The following statement was made during a hearing by a former FBI official who had previously been stationed near the Mexican border investigating cases of trafficking. "It was not just the magnitude of Rick Harrison's operation that made it so dangerous. It was also the legitimacy of the operation. He utilized his famous status as a means of evading scrutiny, so changing illicit activities into businesses that appeared to be legal." According to reports from the Department of Homeland Security, Rick personally allowed shipping deals with known traffickers under the guise of dealing old artwork. One agreement was for an African mask from the 19th century, which was an item that was never located in the shop's collection. The deal was valued at $83,000. According to reports, the purchaser was a corporation based in Liechtenstein. However, it did not have a legitimate address. Additionally, Rick took use of the one-of-a-kind infrastructure that Las Vegas had, which includes casinos, real estate, and logistics centers. As a result, the city became a gateway for the laundering of both money and people. In just 1 month, he went to 5 casinos, transacted more than 40 chip-to-cash transactions, and withdrawn more than $350,000 using an old-fashioned method of money laundering that is still effective. Throughout the course of the trial, the prosecution presented a money flow diagram that positioned Rick at the center. Every single arrow followed the course of funds, every single box indicated a fraudulent enterprise, every single link led to a person who had lost all of their humanity, and every single tainted dollar was ultimately directed back to the gold and silver pawn shop located on Las Vegas Boulevard. The underlying horror was not in the quantity that was involved, rather it was in the accuracy with which victims were categorized as inventory, assigned tags, and transported around as if they were things. Rick did not remain unaware he was the one who designed the entire system. As a former shop technician stated, on few occasions Rick would turn up at 3 in the morning with various men he did not know. It was not antiquities that they transported, rather it was large wooden crates that they used to transport. When I inquired, he responded by saying, "Do not ask questions that you are not supposed to." The affable and well-informed television persona of Rick started to disintegrate, revealing a far more gloomy reality. Rick was the mastermind behind a business that engaged in human trafficking, and every joke and grin hid a much more sinister reality. The truth infrequently makes its presence known through noise. In many cases, it begins in a low-key manner with a cautious account, a single page of paper, or a detail that is too minute to be noticed. For the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the case involving Rick Harrison did not stem from his well-known pawn store or from a definite charge. It all started when Jenna Morales, a 15-year-old girl from Reno, Nevada, vanished without a trace. At first, Jenna's situation did not appear to be particularly odd. The moment she submitted her application for a modeling job that was advertised on social media, she disappeared. In addition to having a polished design, verified account, professional responses, and major brand promises, the website appeared to be legitimate. A photo session in Los Angeles was offered to her, and all of the expenses would be covered. She was never seen again after she boarded a bus from Reno that was running late. Daniel Price, a senior agent, discovered something peculiar despite the fact that hundreds of reports of missing persons are filed each year. After looking through Jenna's emails and analyzing her bank activity, he discovered a transfer of $1,000 that had been routed to an account in Las Vegas that was held by RH Acquisitions LLC. The price for transporting and managing unusual commodities as stated in the document. Up until the point where he found out that the owner was Richard Kevin Harrison, he was suspicious but not criminal. When it came to the evidence that was acquired during the investigation into Rick Harrison, there was no object that had more significance or aroused greater anxiety than the black leather notebook that was discovered in a modest storage facility in the East Sahara Avenue industrial zone of Las Vegas. There was more to this notebook than just another document. It exposed the terrible reality that was hiding behind the once-loved television personality, shattering every plausible alibi in the process. In theory, the building was held by a front business known as Antique Brokerage and Consulting LLC, which was one of the companies that Harrison brought into existence. Keeping fragile items of cultural significance was the official function of this institution. However, in July of 2023, federal authorities conducted a search of the facility in accordance with a specific warrant. They discovered no rare antiques but rather shelves packed with strange items, pictures that had faded, timepieces that were damaged, and cameras that had become worn out. An officer's attention was drawn to a particular wall. In the blueprints there was no room for that. By using thermal scanners, a double wall was revealed. The only thing that was contained within the narrow compartment that was concealed below the insulation was a black notepad that had not been used and was covered in dust. There were 230 handwritten records contained within. None of them are about antiques but rather about people. It didn't take long for the legal team of the FBI to get the leather notepad to the forensic labs. The handwriting experts stated with absolute certainty that each letter was identical to the known writing of Rick Harrison, which can be seen on business contracts and personal letters spanning decades. It was demonstrated by analysis of writing pressure and rhythm. It was written in a natural way without any forgery or coercion. On the very last page there was a chart that had been hand-drawn that detailed the complete infrastructure of human trafficking victims that originated from Eastern Europe, traveling through Serbia using forged documents, entering the United States on cultural visas through Canada, and then traveling through Nevada, Utah, and Arizona on their way to the United States. Ranks were assigned to drop-off spots, places were given coded names, couriers were marked, and victims were categorized according to their age, health, linguistic skills, and compliance. There was more to the journal than just a record. There was the manual for the control. As the trial progressed, it was indisputable proof according to the prosecution. The courtroom became hushed as the evidence was presented. It was necessary for a juror to leave the room. One of them shed tears as they read the note about a girl who was a premium and was 13 years old. There is no history, well-being. Nothing was mentioned by Rick. The documentation validated handwriting, GPS matches, victim timings, and emails from his shadow company, despite the fact that his attorney claimed that he was framed for the assault. The logistics of the rare find were too precise, but the book was more than simply a hint. His failure was due to this. In the event that the black leather notebook provided irrefutable proof that Rick Harrison's fate was sealed, then the comments of those who were closest to him, including his son and a friend who had known him for a long time, rendered the emotional conclusion. The defense of someone's reputation is shattered if a member of that person's own family testifies in a courtroom. The testimony of Corey Harrison and Austin Chumley Russell was the moment that Rick had been waiting for his entire life. As soon as Corey took the deposition, an uncomfortable silence descended upon the room. The jovial and witty son who was most known for his appearances on television was disappeared. As he approached the microphone, the only thing that remained was a man who had been crushed by betrayal. His hands were shaking. When Corey was requested to reveal his identity, he pondered for a moment before quietly stating, "My name is Corey Harrison and I am the son of Richard Kevin Harrison." The jury moved in closer as his voice began to falter. During the year 2019, he described a chilly shift. Eerie late-night gatherings, doors that were shut, and an eerie feeling of secrecy were all there. When he went back to the shop after hours one evening, he heard crying coming from the location behind the counter. The following day, Rick said that he would deal with it. Do not ask for anything that you are unable to handle. Shortly after that, Corey was removed from accounts and denied access to rooms that he had previously been able to freely run. And then the box arrived. An incorrectly routed cargo that he opened by accident. There were not antiquities inside but rather photographs of young women with labels and codes. Rick's only answer to being confronted was to say, "Get over it and forget about it." On that particular evening, Corey distanced himself from his father for good. Although the general public thought it was a fight over branding, it was actually a nightmare that he was unable to discuss until now. However, Rick never responded with a denial. The response was his silence, which reverberated more loudly than any words that could have been spoken. While everyone in the courtroom held their breath, Rick glanced absent-mindedly ahead. As opposed to Corey Austin, although Chumley Russell was not a member of the Russell family by blood, he was a member of the Russell family by bond. Over the course of more than 20 years he had been standing next to Rick long before Pawn Stars had aired, and he was known as the cute and funny sidekick on film. A lack of a playful appeal greeted Chumlee as she entered the courtroom. His manner was resolute and resolutely keen. He confessed that at first he dismissed Rick's questionable behaviors as nothing more than tax evasion or a violation of the norms that govern corporate operation. In 2018, however, peculiar patterns began to appear. At approximately 2 or 3 in the morning, Rick would arrive in a white van driven by the same driver in the same vehicle. They delivered enormous wooden containers that were devoid of any marks. He would then radio, "Item 27 is in storage, handle it in a discreet manner." At one point in time, Chumlee made a joke and inquired as to whether or not it was an extraterrestrial artifact. The only thing Rick did was look, and his response was icy. "Don't make jokes about things you don't understand." He was unable to forget that line. Later, in the latter half of the year 2021, Chumlee was in the vicinity of the storage room when she heard a child sobbing and banging. He reported it. But Rick's attitude was chilling. He was surprised by Rick's reaction. "Your statement is obviously incorrect, and if you are a wise person you will never bring it up again." He lost all faith in him at that same instant. The codes, the crates, and the cries all clicked into place when the notepad was brought to the surface. "It dawned on me that I had been neglecting something devilish. There was no way I could go to my grave with that silence." An attempt was made by the defense to discredit him by bringing up a drug complaint from 2016. The Chumlee, however, did not waver. "Even if I have made mistakes, I have never treated people as if they were objects. I knew I had to make my voice heard after I witnessed what Rick had done." For decades, long before the cameras ever rolled, Chumlee performed the role of the charming fool on Pawn Stars. He was sent on errands and cracked jokes, and he won hearts with his innocence.